an activity or a reference to breath play, breath control. That is accomplished through very common BDSM. Can be choking, can be closing off the nose, nostrils, can be a rope around the neck, it can be hanging, Many times the person receiving it enjoys that too, kind of like an autoerotic type of effect.
This is 50-year-old Steven Zelich casually explaining to detectives the concept of breath control in the world of BDSM, a term that stands for bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, and sadomasochism. But despite his calm and collected demeanor, Steven is sitting in that interrogation room as the prime suspect of a chilling double homicide. On June 5th, 2014, 2 bags were discovered along the side of a rural road in the small town of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Inside the bags were human remains so decomposed that they could no longer be identified. The gruesome discovery was made by an unsuspecting highway worker who immediately called the police after catching the unmistakable stench of rotting flesh. When police opened the bags, they found one body in each, and while both bodies were in advanced stages of decomposition, they showed differing levels of decay. The body in the black bag was clearly female, with a ball gag still lodged in her mouth and a rope tightly wrapped around her neck. Meanwhile, the body in the pink bag was wrapped in a plastic wrap and had been completely mummified, with one hand protruding from the plastic. It was obvious that both the victims had been murdered a long time ago. However, no one could have predicted that it was an act of pleasure that led to this horrifying scene, and the killer behind them was someone meant to serve and protect the public. The police began combing through missing persons reports, hoping to find a match for the body in the black bag. And before long, they got a lead. The victim was identified as 37-year-old Laura Simonson, who had been reported missing by her mother after she failed to come home for over 3 weeks. As a divorced single mother of 7 children, this was completely out of character and immediately raised alarms. But while the police were able to identify Laura Simonson through her tattoos and DNA, the second victim presented a far greater challenge. DNA testing yielded no matches, and the body was so heavily mummified that no identifying features remained. With no leads, the victim was labeled a Jane Doe. In an effort to uncover her identity, forensic experts constructed a facial reconstruction. However, the haunting image provided little hope of someone recognizing a loved one, leaving the mystery unsolved. For Laura, however, the police already had a solid lead. When she was reported missing, the Minnesota police issued a crime alert, which caught the attention of a manager at the Microtel Inn & Suites in Rochester. The manager vividly remembered seeing Laura at the hotel, but she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a man. Although the CCTV footage of Laura arriving at the hotel had already been erased, footage from the following day, November 3rd, 2013, provided a crucial breakthrough. It captured the same man leaving the hotel alone. Laura wasn't with him. The hotel manager later confirmed he paid for their stay in cash before leaving alone. So, when Laura's body was found stuffed in a suitcase, the case shifted from a missing person investigation to an active murder case. The man seen with her at the hotel was now confirmed as one of the last people to see her alive. However, it wouldn't take very long for him to become the prime suspect in the case, because the rope around Laura's neck revealed not just her DNA, but also his. And while the investigators didn't know exactly how Laura had been killed, her online activity painted a grim picture. She had arranged to meet someone from a site called collarme.com, a platform for BDSM enthusiasts. The user she had been speaking with went by the username Mr. Handcuffs, and his profile picture confirmed he was the same man that police had identified from the hotel's CCTV footage, Steven Zelich. His profile also revealed a twisted fixation with dominance and control, an obsession he would refuse to accept throughout the course of the investigation. Zelich had given Laura explicit instructions: cut all ties with her family, sell her van, block her credit cards, and then come to him. She was meant to live under his control as his slave every hour of every day. The investigators now had enough to drag Zelich in for an interrogation. And on June 25th, 2014, Zelich was finally brought in for questioning.
That's your base, you got your...
Yeah, if you wanted.
No, I trust you. We got ready for that.
Would never raise a hand, you guys.
Your career, I would never sit here with someone in custody who still has a baton on.
I know.
I'm not going to strip you.
I've been so aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Because I have...
At first glance, the scene might look strange. It's almost unheard of to allow a criminal to hold on to any kind of weapon in an interrogation room. But the detectives had a calculated reason. By letting Zelich keep his baton, they wanted him to feel a sense of familiarity, as if he was speaking to his peers, since he was an ex-cop himself.
This is not a part of an investigation similar to last time.
Right.
And I'm not going back to work.
No, you're not. Steve, the DA issued a warrant for your arrest. And that's on DNA evidence.
Zelich was already on the cops' radar when Laura Simonson disappeared. His face had popped up clear as day on the Microtel Hotel's CCTV footage. But this time, he knew that it wasn't just a simple missing persons case anymore. He was in way deeper, and there was no easy way out. The police had already secured a warrant to search Zelich's house and computers. Knowing that he couldn't escape what was coming, he confessed almost immediately.
So, in this case, there was a rope around her neck. It would be tightened and then released, and tightened and released, to where the obvious control, and that's although in this case, arousal causing excitement and all of that, and did not basically had the rope around her neck and pulled it either hard enough and long enough without releasing it.
Okay.
And resulting in her death.
But he wasn't about to let it seem intentional. Instead, he claimed it was an accident, that he went too far during an act of pleasure and lost control. However, the detectives weren't buying it. Zelich had caused the deaths of 2 women on separate occasions in an eerily identical manner, and had kept their bodies hidden for months. On top of that, Zelich had a history of harassing women, a behavior that had eventually forced him to resign from his position as a police officer.
As chief and as an administrator for many years, I went into the calling business, so calling stations to complain a squad was in the area too often. Do you know why she would call?
No, that seems unusual to me also. Most businesses want this. Never was I pushy or lying. I'm always a professional, gentlemanly.
Knowing that Zelich was hiding something, the detectives brought him in for a second interview on June 26, 2014. This time, the focus shifted to the Jane Doe case. The police had finally identified her as 19-year-old Jenny Gomez by her dental records. She had been missing ever since August of 2012, though her family had not filed a case with the police.
You mentioned her as being Jenny. Tell me how you met Jenny.
Jenny was met online on a website, initially on a website, Collar Me.
Is it C-O-L-L-A-R?
M-E, yes.
Okay.
And that is a meeting site, but that's BDSM related. That's
what does BDSM stand for? I'm sorry.
That's a kind of a alternative bondage, discipline, submission, dominance type of website.
Okay. So you meet her on the website, and
we talk, and she's got a profile. I had a profile, and at some point, I don't recall whether I personally approached her or she approached me, but nonetheless, we started conversing back and forth on the website.
It's like a social networking as well?
Yes.
For it. And did she go by her full name, or did she go by her
No, she went by her a handle. You know, you create a handle or a name. And I didn't know right away, but we, I believe it's through yesterday's conversation, I think her handle was Princess JMG. Princess and capital JMG, and I guess that's her. Those are her initials.
Okay. Did you know what her last name was?
Yeah.
What is it?
Gomez. Gomez.
Do you know how old she is?
I want to say at the time she was approximately 19. You know.
And where was she from?
Well, initially it was out west. It was Oregon. And what stuck in my mind was Eugene, Oregon.
This wasn't, however, their first contact with each other.
How does she make it to Wisconsin?
She flies. She flies in.
Okay.
And let me, just for full clarification, you know, she was 19, and I probably made initial contact on Colony with her. She was probably 16 and a half initially.
Oh, so you had like a 2 to 3 year relationship?
Well, a period of time, and then she was 16 and a half-ish, and then there was a period of time of no contact at all, a couple of years. And I guess as it turns out, she was going to school. I believe she went to like a junior college type thing. And then she kind of recontacted me after quite a period, a good period of time of absence, maybe a year to 2 years during that time. So that's where, you have the age difference.
Sure.
So she's 19. And then, we reconnect contact-wise at that point.
Okay.
The fact that Stephen had been exchanging explicit messages with Jenny when she was a minor is one of the lesser depraved facts about this case, especially considering the dark and twisted way that both Jenny and Laura were murdered.
Now, when you say that, what do you mean by that?
Well, I don't know how familiar you guys are with BDSM and all that, but it's a dominant submission type of control hierarchy type of basis. Some people see some of the accessories and some of that, toys, accessories, and then they don't understand exactly what it is. It can be certainly sensual, sexual based, but that's generally not even the focus. Okay. It's more of a type of interaction, leadership, follower, dominant, submission type of dynamic. Okay. With those type of various different tools and toys, and and where, depending on the couple or people involved, it can be sexual or non-sexual, or, it covers a wide variety of, activity. Okay.
So when she was coming down here, what was your guys' relationship going to be in that aspect?
I think her intention was full-time, and that was probably the discussion we were having, full-time.
Where she was submissive to you?
Yeah, and she was going to be here permanent, and it was going to be a kind of a submissive all the time, 24/7 type of.
Okay. But she would reside with you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was definitely what was discussed, and I think that was definitely her understanding.
Despite advertising his desires for a long-term master-slave relationship on his profile, Stephen claimed that it was Jenny who wanted to stay with him in a long-term relationship, not him. After clarifying his intentions, Stephen started giving details about their meeting.
There's an activity or reference to breath play, breath control. That is accomplished through very common BDSM. Can be choking, can be closing off the nose, nostrils, can be rope around the neck. It can be some people are so advanced they do hanging. It's all related to breath constriction. Okay. And many times the motive, I guess, for that is, or the basis for that is, again, control. Many times the person receiving it enjoys that too. Almost kind of I'm hardly an expert, but kind of like an autoerotic type of effect. And ultimately, that Sunday morning, she was, I was using rope, and ultimately, there was constriction, and then it would release, and various touching, and ultimately I got very excited. There's no doubt there's an arousal, there's an erotic sensation, and while this was occurring, at some point it became evident that I don't think she was breathing anymore. And I also, and this was explained, and it caused by the rope, there's no question about that,
When you're behind her, do you have the rope then around, you're holding the rope, or is it something where you put the rope around her neck prior to? How does
prior, at some point I put it on, maybe not initially. And I think I put it on 2, maybe 3 times, but I believe 2 to 3 times around. And you pull, constrict, release, constrict, release, constrict, and that's very, very erotic for me, control-wise. Very erotic, and can be very erotic for the person receiving.
Did she have any other than the neck and the gag, did she have anything else? Any other bounds?
Gag, mouth gag, the rope, which was attached last, and wrists, handcuffs on the wrists. Legs were free.
Okay. Rope attached last to the neck.
It was handcuffs and gag. Okay. And then the third element was the rope.
So the progressive?
Yeah, we started with the handcuffs and the gag, and the rope in this case came into play because it was going to be breath play around the neck, and breath play can be like I think you mentioned earlier. It can be the choking and nose, nostrils, and the rope hanging. It can come in different forms, but this case was rope around the neck.
He repeatedly shifted the focus to the pleasure he claimed to have experienced during the act. However, the detectives made sure to keep the focus on Jenny, her pain, her experience, and the devastating outcome of Stephen's actions. By the way, if you're finding the video interesting so far, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. It really supports the channel. Now, let's dive back in.
And as a control thing you referenced for you, correct? Does she have any say in the whole thing, or is that part of her submission to you? Or
right.
And I've heard things about safe words and stuff like that. How did that work in this arrangement?
In this case, there was no safe words. There are safe words in BDSM depending on the relationship. I've always thought and felt and not used safe words much, if at all. On the other hand, I always also thought that I was, and let me preface before I answer that. I started enjoying BDSM probably age 19 or 20. So it's really it's kind of been a lifestyle, lifetime thing. But to answer that specifically, I never have used the safe words because I never had a problem not keeping control, monitoring the safety and well-being of anybody that I've ever been with. And although this breath play is one of, if not certainly one of the higher level activities, just by the nature of, the breath and obviously the repercussions of something going wrong, or the chances of something going wrong. But so no breath play was used, or no safe words were used.
However, no matter how unintentional the murder may have been, in Stephen's words, what he did after Jenny's death was just as deplorable, if not worse.
So, after you felt that she had passed away,
Yes.
what do you do thereafter?
Oh, that's the moment of truth. And believe me, these questions were asked already. That's the moment I have to decide. You know, I can either call 911 or, you know, call management, call the hotel, call somebody, call police, call rescue, call, you know, or panic and do what I did. And took her, and instead of reporting it, put her in one of the suitcases, closed the suitcase, packed up everything, went downstairs. I don't recall if I went and got a luggage cart and brought it up to the room. Well, I must have. Or if we had it in the room, or maybe just found it in the hallway. But I brought a luggage cart into the hallway, stacked all the luggage, including the pink luggage, which had her in it now, and rolled it out to my car.
She had 2 suitcases. What did all of the stuff in the pink one fit into the other? Did you take everything of hers with you? Or did you leave stuff in the hotel?
No, I took everything with me and put it either in her second bag or piece of luggage, I think, which was smaller, and or in my room in my pieces of luggage. So, but everything left the room.
And we mentioned that she defecated, so that obviously would have left some sort of mess.
A little bit of, not terribly large.
Okay.
And I went to the bathroom and I took either a small bath towel or washcloth type thing, hot water, and that cleaned it up. I think I rinsed out the towel, and I think I left it there for housekeeping. With the other towels.
So no sheets or anything.
No. It was more. It came out. I think a little bit ran down her leg, a little bit, and a small amount on the carpet.
After realizing that Jenny was dead, Stephen chose not to call 911 and instead decided to stuff her body into her bag and take her home. Once he got home unnoticed, Stephen faced another problem: the warm weather. There was no way that he could conceal the body outside, so he resorted to even more disturbing measures.
So after you unload the luggage in your vehicle,
take or put it in my vehicle or whatever, and drive home. And we believe this is August-ish.
That's what we were told as well, like you had said,
And that's warm. So she was taken, the suitcase was taken. Of course, now what do I do? I'm still in there. I have no idea what I want to do or what I'm going to do. I have no idea. She comes in, the pink suitcase comes into the house. I take her out. Well, I empty the refrigerator because my only option is how long do I have with the heat of August before, you're forced to make a decision. She was put in the refrigerator. And really, my thinking, I think, was to buy time and figure out what I'm going to do.
Put in the refrigerator inside the suitcase still, or
no, outside the suitcase, naked, outside the suitcase. And of course, you can imagine you got the shelving and all that. I have to take the shelving out, and now you pretty much have the empty shell of a refrigerator, and put in there, door closed, and seemingly problem solved. Well, I'm making almost light of it because it's not problem's not solved, but it's it gives me time because I get the temperature issue.
Sure.
So that is where she stayed for quite a while. And then in further discussion, the refrigerator's empty, the shelves and all that's out, and I can't use the refrigerator. So a lot of fast food or eating at work or whatever, I can't use my own refrigerator. So in retrospect, it's ridiculous, but that's exactly what happened.
The implications of what Stephen was saying were truly horrifying. Jenny Gomez's body had been rotting in his possession for nearly 2 years, since August of 2012.
And she stayed in that refrigerator. That was in August of 2012.
Right.
When was the next time she came out?
Very, semi-recently. November of last year. November of
2013?
Yeah. November, yeah.
And when?
And that's ultimately... no, I take it back. No. Correct that. Correct that. November of 13 approximately is when I take her out, put her in the suitcase, back out with the second suitcase.
She went back into the original suitcase, that pink one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then in the trunk of the car, because that's now being winter, November of 13 into this past winter.
As Stephen explained how he moved the body around in the same suitcase, he casually mentioned a second suitcase as well.
Okay, now you're saying the trunk with the other suitcase. What do you mean by the other suitcase?
The other suitcase is a second incident that occurred early November of 13 in Minnesota.
Without getting into details about that incident, what occurred in that incident?
Very similar basis, very similar BDSM, very similar circumstances. And that occurred in Rochester, Minnesota, where I talked to the detective today. And early November, I think the first week. And that was the first incident after Jenny. I mean, that was the first in-person contact, BDSM related. It was Jenny, and then second girl, Laura.
Okay. So you didn't have any more BDSM meetings with other females?
No.
Basically in that year?
Correct.
Or what would it be, 8 months, 9 months?
Correct.
10 months?
Correct.
Okay. So when you say very similar, you're saying that you use the same, the breathe control? Breathe
control, probably a little bit more elaborate in the second one. They had rope, and then I think I did utilize some choking and some nostril, all the elements. I think it was a little bit longer session, and maybe a little bit more extensive, or a little bit more. That's what I'm looking for. Did a little bit more things, or utilized a little bit more techniques or tools, so to speak. And it was probably a little longer, and it was definitely intense and very similar in circumstances. Although basically very similar.
This second suitcase was tied to a more intense session he had with Laura Simonson in November of 2013. Stephen claimed that there were no other interactions of this nature between the two incidents. Since both women had been killed in a similar manner, detectives pressed Stephen on how he avoided losing control the second time.
How do you had said that, you have to monitor breathing of the submissive person.
Right.
And when you go, how do you monitor? I mean, what do you practice things with different people and then you just kind of know, or you just kind of...
It's a combination. It's really the most important part has to do with me, the dominant person, can't get so caught up in the scene or the enjoyment or whatever. You have to basically keep your own control. Not the kind of control we're talking about for the person, but you have to kind of separate yourself and can always monitor. You can't fully enjoy. You have to. You can't allow yourself to fully enjoy or to fully lose. Kind of at the moment, the monitoring aspect. And that's really what I was referring to.
Okay.
And that's what didn't occur.
So by you trying the new technique with the nose and going further into the breathing control aspect, you don't really know until you use those techniques on that person. And then you just monitor that person throughout
overall
the session.
That is correct. And what creates an additional problem is if, while I'm doing that, because if I'm just doing that, it would be okay, because I would still be monitoring. It's getting caught up in the enjoyment in the moment to where you're not any longer doing that, monitoring. You're just caught up in the actions and the fun and the enjoyment and the erotic aspect of it, and you're letting it get away from you.
Stephen repeated that the death was accidental and caused by neglect. Then he went on to explain the act itself in more detail.
For myself, the best way to describe it is, in this instance, there was no sex involved, there was no masturbation, there was no ejaculation. But there was still incredible arousal and enjoyment and eroticism and lack of control and all of that things, but sex by that definition did not occur.
Okay. So, no, I understand. Okay. I appreciate you explaining that to me. Yeah. Is that similar to what happened then with Jenny, or was Jenny...
Same thing. There was no sexual intercourse, no masturbation on my part, no anything. I was clothed, she was naked. Very similar in that respect, and the dynamics were very similar.
With their primary goal of uncovering what happened to Jenny accomplished, the detectives briefly left the room. Stephen was quite content with how things had gone and made it a point to thank the detectives for their treatment. However, the detectives weren't finished with Stephen just yet. This was beginning to look far too calculated to be an accident. Later that same day, a second interview was conducted by a different team of detectives. Their objective was to identify the similarities between the two cases and establish a pattern.
What did you do with Jenny's personal belongings?
And that was, I think Gil asked me, or Jeff, I'm not sure, asked me a similar question. And that was just miscellaneously discarded, personal clothing, toiletries or whatever was in there.
What about the more expensive stuff like the electronic tablet or cell phone?
Same thing, just randomly discarded.
So you just threw away the electronic tablet?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember where you threw that away?
No, not really, because that was with both. That was just randomly tossed garbages, dumpsters, just no real plan or purpose with that.
Now, I know that Laura had a cell phone that she had with her.
Okay.
Do you remember what you did with Laura's cell phone?
Same thing. If she had, I don't even specifically recall. I mean, I don't specifically, but anything was probably tossed. Just randomly.
Okay, because the reason why I know about Laura is because in your chats you got pretty specific with Laura on it, and you had said, when you walk through all those things that you talked about, close your accounts and do all that, one thing you had said is keep this phone, have it with you. I won't be able to communicate with you when I leave, but bring this phone with you, and instantly have the instant messenger piece of it.
And I don't specifically remember the phone. I don't specifically, I can't picture it, but any of her, would both randomly, basically just randomly thrown out.
Okay.
What was impossible to ignore was how both Jenny and Laura died in eerily similar circumstances, following the exact same routine with Stephen. How could this just be a coincidence?
When you're getting Laura ready to kind of for this face-to-face encounter, and you're going through the different, what do you call them, demands or criteria or protocol? What did you use?
Protocols.
Protocols. Okay, that was the word. Okay. So when you're going through that with Laura, is there a part? I'm thinking about how important the control is, and not everybody can be at this level of doing this high-end, level of a bondage exercise, with the breath play. And so is there, when you're kind of starting to get Laura for these protocols and going through the protocols, is there a part of Laura's experience that is mirroring Jenny's? Because of how enjoyable and exciting Jenny's was, of kind of trying to recreate, kind of like if it's a fantasy, you'd be kind of putting that same fantasy together. Sure. But for you, like I said, it's not fantasy because it's a reality.
I understand now. Well, there are certainly similarities, and I must have been thinking along those lines. That there are similarities, between these two instances.
Because they almost, like, when you put them up to each other, they're just almost identical, and that's what I was thinking. So you say...
And I don't know if that was absolutely conscious, but when I look at the two, obviously they're very similar. So either I consciously thought that, or planned that, or preferred that, or it maybe just naturally occurred because that was maybe a preference.
So either way, though, kind of you leading yourself down that path because of the preference, whether because you already knew it was enjoyable, so the road map's already there and you're kind of going through it.
In my mind, sure.
Okay.
Stephen did not change his story. He was adamant that in both cases this had been an unfortunate mistake, and he was simply too scared to tell the police.
You remember your first cigarette, right? That was a damn good cigarette. And as you go on over the years, you enjoy it a little bit, but it's not as good as that first cigarette. You know what I'm saying? Are you trying to recreate that experience, that feeling from the first one to the second one?
The part when I listen, it describes very accurate. I can't say consciously that I consciously said to myself, I'm going to recreate. That I like this so much that I'm going to recreate it exactly. Although it appears very accurate.
Well, and that's why I wonder if it's can't or you won't. You know what I mean? Because it's very kind of, when we look at it, it's a total mirror. It's a total mirror, and that breath control exercise, the breath play with Jenny, if I understand from everything that we talked about last night and all the information I know about the BDSM Foundation and that lifestyle, that's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big event. It's not one that you would forget. It's kind of like, winning the Super Bowl. It's up there on the top, and all the people that win the Super Bowl, they're going to remember that Super Bowl, and they're going to want to get to the Super Bowl again, right? I mean, it's magnified. It's significant. It puts you at a different level in the BDSM community that you're willing to do that high-end activity that requires a type of associated risk with it. It's kind of a status in a way. I mean, that's kind of...
I don't disagree. I just, the only thing yesterday and today, the only part that I pause with is that I don't feel or recall that I'm consciously saying, Steve, telling myself or thinking of it so definitively that way. So clearly, that's talking to myself or imaging it that way.
Do you remember yesterday how we were talking between the first one and the second one, and when you got to the second one, you continued to say that it was very much so like the first one. Many times you kept referring to the first one. The second was like the first one. Do you remember saying that to me yesterday?
Yes.
Very similar to like the first one. It's almost like the same MO. If I could, you being a law officer.
Yes. When you look at it, yes, the similarities of the two instances are similar. The only slight part I am pointing out is that I don't recall or feel I was consciously saying, creating it or recreating it.
But thinking back right now, what would you think?
Well, there must have been incredible preference and subconscious, appreciation for the first one, or I just don't recall or feel that I was the first one, the second one. I'm going to recreate it so specifically. That I just don't feel I was doing.
But the detectives were not convinced.
And I have to be honest with you, and kind of before we talked, and before I knew anything kind of about you and BDSM and all this type of stuff, when I was reading the chats between Laura and you, and I'll call it the disappear game, okay? There's kind of this flavor where you're guiding her how to disappear, right? And it's kind of a disappear game, and you're being very thorough on how you're going about, close your accounts, do all this type of stuff. And I get kind of confused in the process, because before I met you, and I do a lot of different work with the FBI, and I've worked with other, offenders that have did different odd things or been very violent, and serial killers that I've talked with, and all that type of stuff. And when I was going through those chats, I thought, this is perfect. This is the perfect crime, because it's so organized. And from a law enforcement perspective, if I go to do a missing person investigation, first I'm going to check their bank accounts. Well, when I go to their bank accounts or the bank, I see the actual person closing the accounts. Maybe I see video and it's the person closing the account. I go online to see, maybe all their accounts are closed. I try to find their belongings. There's no belongings anywhere. They didn't give their belongings away to anybody in their family to show that maybe they were departing.
There's no bank activity.
There's no bank account activity. So sharing from my experience as a law enforcement officer and kind of working in serial crimes, I'm thinking, this is pretty amazing. This is outstanding, in how it's the perfect crime, the disappear game, where it's so organized and thought through that from a law enforcement perspective, it's hard to, one, be able to prove something happened to that person, and two, a lot of times, like in Laura's case and in Jenny's case, they have some type of mental health issues that are there and struggles that they've already had, that sometimes their families don't even realize they're gone because they've had such a transient kind of lifestyle before. So when I was looking at all that, I was really, I have to be honest, I was pretty amazed by it. I thought, this is the perfect game. This is disappear game. And there's no way to, as a law enforcement officer, as I'm weaving and trying to figure every which way that I could find a suspect or find kind of coordinated, all my roads have been closed off. And so for me, you talked about yesterday, the struggles that you were kind of having with, I have this inside, kind of law enforcement sensitive, like being involved and around this camaraderie, and then I'm kind of doing things that are kind of outside of that circle, and there's kind of a dichotomy there, and it's hard to kind of make sense of that because they don't kind of go together sometimes. And for me, I'm having that same kind of dichotomy, because on one side of it, it's so organized and so thought through, and then on the other side of it, the suitcases, like you said last night, not concealed, just kind of put there. Jenny's in your fridge from August of 2012 till November of 2013. you know? So, you know, I bet you if we looked at your financial records, there's probably a lot of fast food during that time period that peaked, right? Because you couldn't use your fridge, right?
I think I mentioned that very specifically, yes.
Yeah. And so I really, help me understand that dichotomy, because I'm really struggling with that, because there's two different pieces there. You know, there's on one side the very organized, perfect kind of crime, and then the not so organized, kind of discarded. I mean, if I didn't know better, I would say there's two different people involved here. You know, somebody else dumped the bodies, and they didn't care about the bodies. They weren't connected to the bodies, so they just put them anywhere.
Right.
And the other person that was more kind of the alpha male in it, or the more, you know, if you had two people, one would be a follower, one would be alpha male, and the alpha male is the one who kind of planned this all out. So, I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think I see the same thing, I suppose. You articulated it very well. I don't even know how to answer that. I see this, same thing. There are parts of the whole law enforcement thing and that, and generally I've been organized and am organized. Mm-hmm. The BDSM activities and enjoyment, or call it a hobby, or participation, has been to varying degrees a long time. Mm-hmm. Like I mentioned yesterday, starting in probably late teens, 19-ish, 20-ish, maybe. Right through still many years of law enforcement and after law enforcement.
Well, and I think, I'm kind of a visual person, so I was just going to kind of write down kind of some of the things in columns that fit for one side of it versus the other, Sure. So we talked about the disappear game being organized.
And let me just mention on that, because you bring up so many things, that whole organized thing, I certainly can't take credit for that myself. That's a whole very common thing in BDSM, and the whole on the higher end of master-slave type thing.
Stephen dismissed the theory by arguing that meticulous planning was common in BDSM interactions and didn't imply premeditated murder. The detectives then confronted him with a text exchange between him and Laura.
The one thing, too, that I wanted to talk about on my organized side here that was kind of ironic is one of the last chats you have with Laura, you say, remember, no communication, I'm going to leave my phone from Milwaukee, and I come down, and I forget the specifics, basically you say something like, you understand no communications, and she said, I understood no communications. Is that so they can't trace your phone when you dump my body?
No, that is just all that kind of talk and planning is part and parcel of the culture, the BDSM, the control,
But I get what
specific to the long-term plan.
I get what you're saying as far as you saying I'm not bringing my phone and there's not going to be communication. But Laura's saying, is that so you can dump my body? Are you saying, Laura, saying that is part of the BDSM? Because I saw that as an outlier, that was Laura kind of tongue-in-cheek saying, hey, kind of joke around, and how ironic what happened.
Correct. And that type of tongue-in-cheek comment is made all the time. That's not uncommon for submissive slave. In that type of conversation, that type of comment is...
So you're telling me that there's other people in the BDSM culture that play the disappear game. And that disappear game is my term, but...
Sure, it's your term, and it's accurate, I guess, but this type of communication that you have, that you have my communication with Jenny and Laura and others, is not certainly unique to me, or it's not created by me, or I didn't think it up. Okay. That type of interaction goes on, far more frequently than you would imagine. And there's people not like myself, but dominants, or who would have this kind of conversation far more graphic than anything I had, and would you will find, or you would find, similar type of conversation regarding long term.
Okay.
If that's the goal between the two parties.
Stephen continued to dismiss this as typical communication in this sort of engagement. But even with all his excuses, the investigators couldn't ignore one glaring inconsistency. Why did he dump the bodies so recklessly after successfully staying under the radar for so long? So they proposed a theory as to why this could be the case.
I understand what you're saying, Steve. I'm trying to make it make sense in my head. You know, in one sense, it seems like the perfect crime. You know, and one person could say the reason why, you know, like you said to me, do you think I wanted to get caught? And there's two reasons that a person would want to do that. One is they're out of control, they can't stop. They're realize, you know, I'm not willing to go to the PD, but I'm willing to do something like this, and then this will maybe be over. I don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm tired. I'm sick of kind of worrying about this. The other reason is taking control of it again. And taking control of this situation that's out of control by making it look like it's disorganized and not calculated, then creates this ultimate kind of red herring of, I'm not someone who planned this out thoroughly. It's not the perfect crime, but it still is because that person is playing. They're pretending and kind of taking on this thing, this kind of, you know.
That description, though, is that's a.
But think about it, though.
Yeah.
It's pretty calculating. It's pretty calculating, but I'm trying to make it look at things. And when you said that last night, and being honest again, you didn't say, Carrie, I put him there because I wanted to get caught because I couldn't stop. Or I put him there because I didn't know, I wanted it to be over, and that would make it over. You know, by police finding it, I just wanted it to be done. You didn't say that. You didn't offer anything else up. You just said, Carrie, do you think
I told you, I believe I told you, I didn't have an answer, a solution. Mm-hmm. I was somewhat forced. I thought, I view it as very, what's the word I want to use? Very, I acted, but I think I was forced to, because weather and time, I was being forced. I was forced on a move that all the way back to November, the refrigerator, then you have outside, the car's outside.
And it's warm.
It's wintertime, sub-zero, and the weather, all that time, I still didn't have a solution or a plan. I didn't, and I was forced, I think, by the weather.
They weren't ready to let go of the idea that these murders were intentionally orchestrated by Stephen. This wasn't just speculation, though. The detectives had one final piece of evidence that could significantly strengthen their case.
This is that other flight information that we were talking about last night.
Yeah.
So what do you remember when you see that?
That was, and that's my writing. And it looks like somebody I was talking to, would have been somebody I was talking to, BDSM related, that they, may have planned a trip here.
This is November 30th.
Okay.
Which is,
we're talking previous, just
we're talking November 20, I'm guessing 2013.
Right, last year.
Yep, so Laura is in your trunk. Jenny's in your trunk at this time.
Right.
Anything else that because for somebody who's had such significant life events, Steve, what you just said, I could come up with that. I could say, based on looking at this, looks like your handwriting, looks like somebody you're probably talking to on BDSM who was planning a trip here.
Right.
I'm having a little bit of trouble not having you having more recollection about some of this stuff.
Well,
knowing.
That's a specific flight. That's an arrival time.
Sure.
I mean, that's a specific. Somebody's flying in.
They gave me that. They gave me that.
Yeah.
Who gave you that?
Well, the person I was talking to.
Who flew in? Who was?
Nobody flew in. That's the thing. Nobody flew in. You'll find no match. What you will find in BDSM and online, maybe call it the internet. Mm-hmm. For every time you have a legitimate contact with somebody, mm-hmm. some type of correspondence, you also have a whole lot of foolishness and just.
I get that.
That doesn't.
I understand
that's
that
not
fantasy
real.
that doesn't go anywhere, but this looks like it was going somewhere. This looks real to me.
Right.
Because if I go right now to Delta
Yes.
and I say, Delta, give me a list of everybody who flew in on November 30th,
Right.
Friday, this flight, this time, give me a list, and I go through, I will find somebody's name like that on there. And I will be able to find that person and go interview them.
Sure. I don't know. I don't.
And when I do that, because even though she's in the UK,
Right.
we have FBI in the UK.
Sure.
I can send them there. So when they go and interview her, she's going to say, I don't know, Stephen. I don't know.
Well, no, she'll say we had interaction or some kind of computer thing, interaction, but she's going to say she obviously didn't get on that flight, didn't.
How do you know she didn't get on the flight? You don't really even remember it, you're saying.
No. Well, I remember that I don't remember her. I don't specifically remember her. I couldn't tell you what she looks like. I couldn't tell you specific. I'm sure we had some generally consistent, common communication, general BDSM along the lines that, because they're all very similar.
So Jenny flew in,
Right. Right.
So we will. This is one of the things that we will do. We will follow up on this to make sure that is still with us.
Of course, and if we'll take it to the extreme. If she came in and if something happened, of course you're going to find out that girl was on the plane and blah, blah, blah.
I will be able to find that. I'll be able to find that she was on the plane and who she was and if she's still alive.
And I'm almost amazed, you'll have it in short order.
Yeah.
So I have there's no problem. There's no problem. There's no fear on my part. There's nothing for me to add.
Simply denying this reality wasn't going to cut it.
I understand what you're saying. The only thing that gets me wrong questioning you is because when you say, why would I say I know nothing about it when I know eventually you're going to find out?
Yes.
Is the same temporary kind of band-aid that you did with Jenny and with Laura by putting Jenny in the fridge and putting that, I don't deal with that yet. Sometime that's going to come out.
What?
Jenny or Laura in that trunk. Sometime that's going to come out.
The difference being the current circumstances change that or void that.
How does that change that for you?
Well,
the current circumstances that you're in.
Well, the current circumstances at this point, custody. If you were to present that, I would say, yeah. Add that to the list, and we can talk about that. But there's nothing there to talk about.
Okay.
So.
And if you did, you remember it would be a significant event, like you remember Jenny and Laura.
If it were to that, I would certainly be able to tell you, I had any in-person contact with that person.
With a pattern now clearly established, detectives confronted him again about his thought process as he planned his interaction with Laura.
In that process of knowing what happened to Jenny, you know that there's potential that Laura could die.
Yes, although I can't recall specifically thinking about it so consciously, but I'm sure to some degree or some way is going to maybe go through acknowledgement through your mind. I mean, I don't recall myself thinking of it so specifically or directly like that.
What about because remember we talked about the compartments,
yes.
Kind of putting things in. And this is a compartment, a big compartment. For what happened to Jenny is kind of put into a compartment for you. That's how I see it. And it's kind of there and it's preserved and you're able to kind of do other things over here and you go there when you need stuff from it and as far as visually and fantasy based, right? It's there, but sometimes you can just not think about it. is there a part of this where, you know, and I'm only going off of my own thoughts of this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going through and you're thinking, I'm going to do breath play again, we're going to do stuff, it's going to be exciting, and last time it was very exciting. Something bad happened, but it was very exciting. There's a chance something bad could happen again. Do you at all start to think if that happens?
Sure.
Any more planning into that scenario, given now that you've been through Jenny? You know what I mean?
Well, I'm sure there was to some degree, because I know that you're correct. You're correct when you say that it's interesting, erotic, intense, exciting, and you have Jenny, but I still chose to go there. And that's, on one hand, that defies, one could say it defies logic. And, you know, you have one fantasy, you think that you could pick another activity, or lesser, safer, or something, other activity. And did go there again. In multiple ways, probably multiple ways that...
And longer duration, probably, right? Yeah.
Like 3 different versions, so definitely a longer period of time.
They were convinced that Stephen had planned all of this intentionally, but he refused to admit it.
Do you see how cunning you are?
Oh,
how you move that car off that lot, how you went and you tried to get rid of that smell. So you are trying to, again, be organized and be in control. It's not like all of a sudden I knocked at the police station and I say I did it. So at some point you didn't want to get away with it.
Guilt. I would interpret it opposite of that. I would interpret it as the weather is forcing me to act now. I would say that not so cunning. In fact, almost the opposite. And I moved it off the line only because, well...
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ.
How are you going to keep that in there?
Somebody noticed for the first time.
But how come when we were talking about all this stuff last night, that's not something that gets talked about? Like, yeah, I had to dump those bodies. I had to get rid of them because I was at work 2 weeks ago or whatever the time is, and someone said this stinks, and here I have been trying to mask the smell with spray.
We talked about so much last night, but that was just part of it. I thought we covered it maybe with different words. That it was the temperature. We talked about the temperature.
Yeah, we did talk about the temperature, and then you could smell it. But somebody else smelling it takes it to another level, right? I need to act fast.
It was getting warmer.
It was getting warmer. It had been hot all week. It had been 80 in the 80s that week.
Yes.
Very sorry that this occurred. And I'm very sorry Jenny was the victim, and I wasn't able to protect her the way I was supposed to.
In August of 2014, Stephen Zelich pleaded guilty to second-degree murder with intent in the case of Laura Simonson. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. This was in addition to the 35-year sentence he received after pleading guilty to first-degree reckless homicide with the use of a dangerous weapon in the case of Jenny Gomez. While Zelich managed to avoid first-degree intentional homicide charges, which would have carried a mandatory life sentence, authorities weren't overly concerned. Zelich's age upon release would ensure he could no longer pose a threat to the community. If you think this case was horrific, you need to check out my video on the evil torture house.